What happens when an arrogant New York journalist armed with statistics and a tablet meets an Amish farmer who's never sent an email? Ethan Cole came to Lancaster County to expose outdated farming practices, but left questioning everything he believed about progress. The town hall debate was supposed to be a simple takedown of traditional methods. Instead, Samuel Yoder's quiet wisdom sparked a confrontation that left the crowd stunned. Without PowerPoint slides or scientific papers, the elderly farmer revealed a truth about sustainability that modern agriculture had overlooked for decades. When Cole returned to his Manhattan office, his planned exposé had transformed into something else entirely. The story that emerged would shake the foundations of industrial farming and force America to reconsider what advancement really means. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Lancaster County's rolling farmland as Ethan Cole's sleek hybrid car wound its way through the narrow country roads. The contrast between his vehicle and the horse-drawn buggies he passed served as a perfect metaphor for the story he planned to write, a clash between progress and what he viewed as outdated traditions that were holding back agricultural advancement. The town hall stood as a bridge between two worlds, its red brick facade weathered by time yet maintained with careful attention. Inside, the wooden benches filled quickly with an eclectic mix of English, non-Amish residents in modern attire, and Amish community members in their traditional plain clothing. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation as Mayor Carl Whitman prepared the podium for the evening's debate on sustainable farming practices. Ethan adjusted his designer glasses, reviewing his notes one final time. His research painted a clear picture. Traditional Amish farming methods were inefficient compared to modern industrial agriculture. His articles had earned him recognition in New York's elite circles, and he'd made a career of challenging conventional wisdom. Tonight would be no different, or so he thought. Among the gathering crowd, Samuel Yoder sat quietly with his daughter Miriam. His weathered hands, calloused from decades of working the land, rested peacefully in his lap. Unlike many around him who fidgeted with phones or tablets, Samuel's stillness commanded a presence that drew curious glances from nearby attendees. Miriam noticed how her father's serene demeanor contrasted sharply with the restless energy emanating from the journalist at the front of the room. Mayor Whitman approached the podium, his diplomatic nature evident in how he surveyed the room before speaking. Tonight's town hall will address the future of farming in Lancaster County, he began, his voice carrying authority tempered with respect. We welcome special guest Ethan Cole, whose work on agricultural modernization has gained national attention. Ethan strode to the podium with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. His opening statement was precise and pointed, filled with statistics about crop yields, resource management, and technological efficiency. He spoke of GPS-guided tractors, automated irrigation systems, and the promise of genetic modification. With each point, he cast subtle yet pointed criticism toward traditional farming methods. The audience listened intently as Ethan specifically highlighted the Amish community's resistance to modern farming techniques. In an age where we can precisely control every aspect of crop growth, why do some insist on methods from the 19th century? His gaze settled challengingly on Samuel Yoder, whose presence he'd noted earlier. Mr. Yoder, as one of the largest traditional farmers in the county, how do you justify refusing technologies that could feed more people with less environmental impact? The room grew silent as all eyes turned to Samuel. Miriam felt a protective instinct rise within her, but her father's gentle touch on her arm assured her that no defense was necessary. Samuel stood slowly, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The contrast between his simple black attire and Ethan's polished appearance couldn't have been starker. Yet something in Samuel's bearing made the journalist's confidence waver ever so slightly. What happened next would transform not just the evening's debate, but the perspectives of everyone present, most notably, Ethan Cole himself. As Samuel prepared to speak, the room held its collective breath, unaware they were about to witness a masterclass in wisdom that no university could teach. The morning sun cast long shadows across Lancaster County's patchwork fields as Ethan Cole drove his hybrid vehicle along the winding country roads. His GPS struggled to locate the exact coordinates of Samuel Yoder's farm, a fact that only reinforced his preconceptions about the technological backwardness of the Amish community. How could anyone choose to live without the basic conveniences of modern life? Through his car window, Ethan observed horse-drawn buggies clip-clopping along the shoulder of the road, their drivers dressed in traditional dark clothing. The sight struck him as almost theatrical, like a living museum piece, stubbornly refusing to acknowledge the march of progress. He pulled over to take notes on his tablet, jotting down observations about what he perceived as inefficient farming methods in the surrounding fields. A young woman in a plain dress and bonnet caught his attention as she worked in a nearby garden. Miriam Yoder moved with practiced efficiency, her movements suggesting an intimate knowledge of the soil and its needs. When she noticed Ethan watching, she straightened up and offered a friendly wave, catching him off guard with her open demeanor. "Are you looking for someone?" Miriam called out, her voice carrying across the morning air. The question prompted Ethan to step out of his car, tablet in hand. "I'm here to see Samuel Yoder," he replied, trying to mask his urban sophistication. "I'm Ethan Cole from the Progressive Voice." Miriam's expression revealed recognition of the publication name, but her welcoming smile never wavered. "That's my father. He's in the barn just now, but he'll be finished soon. Would you like some water while you wait?" The offer of hospitality didn't align with Ethan's predetermined narrative about isolated, suspicious communities. He accepted more out of journalistic curiosity than thirst, following Miriam to a well-maintained farmhouse that seemed frozen in time. The absence of power lines and modern amenities struck him as both fascinating and frustrating. Inside, the home's simplicity spoke of a different kind of wealth, one measured in craftsmanship rather than convenience. Miriam poured water from a hand pump into a glass, the action so natural it seemed to challenge Ethan's assumption about the superiority of modern plumbing. "Your father knows I'm here to discuss sustainable farming practices?" Ethan asked, unable to keep a hint of condescension from his voice. "Yes," Miriam responded, her calm demeanor unchanged. "He's looking forward to sharing our methods with you, though perhaps not in the way you might expect." The comment caught Ethan's attention. Before he could probe further, the sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention to the door. Samuel Yoder entered, his presence filling the room with quiet authority. His weathered hands and face told stories of decades working the land, while his eyes held a sharp intelligence that made Ethan shift uncomfortably in his chair. "Welcome to our home, Mr. Cole," Samuel said, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "I understand you have questions about how we choose to live and work." The simple statement carried no defensive undertone, no hint of the resistance Ethan had expected. Instead, it suggested an openness to dialogue that challenged his predetermined narrative. How could he maintain his critical stance against someone who showed such genuine willingness to engage? Mayor Carl Whitman's arrival moments later added another layer of complexity to the situation. The mayor's respectful interaction with Samuel suggested a deep understanding between the traditional and modern worlds that Ethan hadn't anticipated. As they prepared to depart for the town hall meeting, Ethan found himself reconsidering his approach. What had seemed like a straightforward exposé was beginning to feel more like an exploration into unexpected territory. The Lancaster County Community Center buzzed with anticipation as Mayor Carl Whitman called the town hall debate to order. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the wooden podium where Ethan Cole stood. His tablet and research papers spread before him like weapons of modern warfare. Across the room, Samuel Yoder sat quietly, his weathered hands folded in his lap, a stark contrast to Ethan's technological arsenal. "Mr. Cole, you have the floor," Mayor Whitman announced, his voice carrying authority gained from years of mediating community discussions. The crowd, a mix of English and Amish residents, settled into an expectant silence. Ethan adjusted his microphone, his confident smile barely masking his certainty of victory. "Let's talk about efficiency and environmental impact," he began, pulling up charts on the projector screen. "Our studies show that traditional farming..." Methods waste up to 40% more resources than modern agricultural techniques. Mr. Yoder, how do you justify these losses when we have the technology to prevent them? Samuel remained still, his expression unchanged as Ethan continued his assault. Your rejection of automated irrigation systems alone costs thousands of gallons of water annually. Did you know that GPS-guided tractors can reduce fuel consumption by 30%? Or that genetic modifications could increase your crop yield while reducing pesticide use? The journalist's questions grew more pointed, each backed by statistics and peer-reviewed studies. He highlighted the carbon footprint of horse-drawn plows versus modern machinery, the inefficiency of manual harvesting, and the economic impact of refusing to participate in modern supply chains. In the audience, Miriam Yoder watched her father with quiet confidence. She recognized Ethan's tactics, the same arguments she'd encountered during her own interactions with the English world. Yet she saw something in her father's patient demeanor that Ethan had missed entirely, the wisdom of centuries contained in that silence. Furthermore, Ethan pressed, his voice rising with conviction, your community's resistance to scientific advancement isn't just about personal choice anymore. In an era of climate change and global food security challenges, don't we have a moral obligation to embrace methods that could feed more people with fewer resources? The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded in agreement with Ethan's points, while others glanced uncertainly between the confident journalist and the silent farmer. Mayor Whitman leaned forward slightly, preparing to intervene if necessary, but something in Samuel's composure held him back. And what about the younger generation? Ethan gestured toward several young Amish men and women in the audience. By clinging to these outdated methods, aren't you denying them the opportunities that modern agriculture provides? The chance to compete in today's global market? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ethan had touched on a sensitive point, the future of farming in a rapidly changing world. He paused, allowing his words to sink in before delivering what he believed would be his coup de grace. Mr. Yoder, in light of these facts, how can you defend practices that seem to prioritize tradition over progress, sentiment over science, and personal comfort over global responsibility? The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Samuel Yoder, who had yet to speak a single word in his defense. The moment stretched, tension building as the community waited for his response. Would the old farmer have an answer to these modern challenges? Or had Ethan Cole finally exposed the fundamental flaws in the Amish way of life? Samuel slowly rose from his chair, and in that simple movement, something in the room's atmosphere shifted. His presence, though humble, carried in weight that even Ethan couldn't ignore. The time had come for wisdom to answer innovation, for experience to meet expertise, and for a perspective that would challenge everything Ethan thought he knew about progress. The Lancaster County Community Center fell silent as Samuel Yoder slowly rose from his wooden chair. His weathered hands, marked by decades of honest labor, rested gently on the podium. The contrast between his simple black attire and Ethan Cole's tailored suit couldn't have been more striking, yet it was Samuel's quiet presence that commanded the room's attention. Friend, Samuel addressed Ethan directly, his voice carrying the gentle cadence of Pennsylvania Dutch. These speaks of efficiency and progress as if they were the same thing. But what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? The biblical reference wasn't lost on the audience, many of whom shifted in their seats, sensing the weight of what was to come. Samuel continued, drawing from his 60 years of farming experience. When thee talks of sustainable farming, I wonder if thee knows what that word truly means. On our farm, we've worked the same land for 5 generations. The soil is richer now than when my grandfather first tilled it. How? Because we listen to the land instead of trying to dominate it. Ethan opened his mouth to interject, but Mayor Whitman raised a hand, recognizing the importance of letting Samuel speak uninterrupted. Samuel shared how their farming methods naturally integrated pest control through crop rotation, soil enrichment, through natural composting and water conservation, through time-tested techniques. Thee speaks of technology as if it were the answer to every question. But has thee considered that sometimes the question itself might be wrong? We don't reject progress. We evaluate whether each change brings us closer to or further from our Values. Does it strengthen our community? Does it maintain our connection to the land? Does it honor our relationship with God? Samuel's daughter Miriam, seated in the front row, noticed Ethan's expression shifting from condescension to genuine curiosity. Her father continued, "Last summer, when drought hit the county, many modern farms struggled because their irrigation systems depended on electricity and fuel. Our community came together sharing resources and labor. We survived not because we had better technology, but because we had stronger bonds." The farmer's words resonated through the hall as he explained how their methods naturally aligned with modern environmental concerns. "We don't need studies to tell us to rotate crops. We see it in the health of our soil. We don't need apps to tell us about weather patterns. We read the sky and feel the wind. This isn't ignorance, it's intimacy with our world." Samuel shared how their community's children learned farming not from textbooks but through apprenticeship, developing an intuitive understanding of ecological systems that many agricultural scientists spent years studying to comprehend. He spoke of how their methods preserved biodiversity, maintained soil health, and created resilient food systems without relying on external inputs. "The asks why we don't embrace modern methods," Samuel continued, his voice growing softer, compelling everyone to lean in. "Perhaps the better question is, why does modern society embrace solutions before fully understanding the problems? We've watched neighboring farms grow bigger, yet their families grow smaller. We've seen productivity increase, yet community bonds decrease. What is the true cost of this progress?" The audience, initially divided between skeptics and supporters, found themselves united in rapt attention. Even the most ardent critics of Amish practices couldn't deny the wisdom in Samuel's words. He wasn't just defending a way of life. He was offering a perspective that challenged the very foundations of modern agricultural assumptions. What would happen next would transform not just the debate, but the perspectives of everyone present, especially Ethan Cole. How would the journalist respond to this unexpected challenge to his worldview? What deeper truths about progress and tradition were yet to be revealed in this extraordinary exchange? The Lancaster County Community Center fell into a profound silence as Samuel Yoder's words hung in the air. Ethan Cole, who had arrived with such certainty, found himself gripping the podium, his knuckles white. How could someone who rejected modern technology possess such clarity about the very future Ethan claimed to champion? Samuel's earlier response about sustainable farming practices had struck an unexpected chord. "Friend, thee speaks of sustainability." As if it were a new concept, Samuel had said, his voice carrying the weight of generations. But what could be more sustainable than a way of life that has sustained not just the land, but the spirit of community for centuries? Ethan's carefully prepared arguments about efficiency and technological advancement suddenly felt hollow. He glanced at his laptop, its screen glowing with statistics and counterpoints, but the numbers seemed to blur before his eyes. The Amish farmers' simple yet profound observations about the relationship between people, land, and community challenged everything Ethan had assumed about progress. Mayor Carl Whitman, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere, leaned forward in his chair. The scheduled format of the debate had naturally evolved into something more meaningful, a dialogue that transcended the original premise. The audience, initially divided between traditional and progressive viewpoints, now sat united in their attention to this unexpected exchange. Miriam Yoder, watching from the front row, recognized the transformation occurring in the journalist's demeanor. She had seen this before, the moment when outsiders first truly understood the depth beneath the seeming simplicity of their way of life. But rarely had she witnessed such a dramatic shift in someone who had arrived so certain of their own superiority. "Mr. Cole," Samuel continued, his weathered hands folded calmly before him, "thee asks why we choose to live without the conveniences of modern life. Perhaps the better question is, what do we gain by choosing simplicity?" He paused, allowing the question to settle. "In thy world, how many hours does a man work to pay for his conveniences? And how many of those conveniences truly bring him peace?" The questions pierced through Ethan's professional facade. He thought of his own life in New York, the constant notifications on his phone, the endless emails, the social media presence he had to maintain. When was the last time he had experienced the kind of peace he saw in Samuel's eyes? A local business? Owner in the audience raised her hand, no longer directing her question to Ethan but to Samuel. "But don't you feel left behind by the world?" she asked, genuine curiosity replacing the earlier skepticism. Samuel's response carried no trace of defensiveness. "Left behind? No. We choose our pace deliberately. The world rushes forward, always seeking the next thing. But does it know where it's going? We choose to walk slowly enough to know our neighbors, to watch our children grow, to feel the seasons change." Ethan found himself nodding unconsciously. The story he had come to write was transforming before his eyes. Instead of exposing the backwardness of Amish practices, he was discovering something far more valuable, a perspective that challenged the very foundations of what modern society considered progress. The room had become a space of collective reflection, where the lines between interviewer and subject, modern and traditional, had begun to blur. Mayor Whitman observed as people who had entered the hall with firm opinions now sat with thoughtful expressions, reconsidering their assumptions about progress and wisdom. What began as a debate about farming practices had evolved into a profound examination of what truly matters in life. As the sun began to set outside, casting long shadows through the community center's windows, Ethan Cole realized that he had come seeking a story about the past confronting the future, only to discover that sometimes the future might have more to learn from the past than he had imagined. The Lancaster County Community Center fell into a profound silence as Samuel Yoder's words settled over the assembled crowd. Ethan Cole, who had arrived ready to challenge what he perceived as outdated farming practices, found himself caught in an unexpected moment of self-reflection. His notebook lay closed on the podium, his prepared questions forgotten. Mayor Carl Whitman observed the transformation occurring before him. What had begun as a contentious debate about agricultural methods had evolved into something far more meaningful. The mayor's experienced eyes noticed how the audience members leaned forward in their seats, hanging on to every word from the elderly Amish farmer. Samuel's daughter, Miriam, stood quietly at the back of the hall, watching her father. With quiet pride, she had witnessed countless instances of his wisdom over the years, but seeing it touch others in such a profound way filled her with a deep sense of satisfaction. The modern world often dismissed their way of life, yet here was proof of its enduring value. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice carrying a new note of humility. "Mr. Yoder, I came here today believing I understood what progress meant. I saw your rejection of modern technology as a limitation, but you've shown me that sometimes what we call progress might actually be moving us backward. How do you maintain such clarity in a world that's constantly pushing for change?" Samuel adjusted his plain black hat, his weathered hands moving with the same deliberate care he applied to tending his fields. "Friend, the ask's about clarity, but perhaps the question is about listening. When the world moves too fast, we lose the ability to hear the wisdom in the wind, the lessons in the soil, and the truth in silence. Our way is not about rejecting progress, it's about preserving what matters most." The crowd stirred and several local farmers nodded in agreement. A young agricultural student raised her hand, no longer to challenge but to learn. "But how do you balance tradition with the need to feed a growing world?" Samuel's response carried the weight of generations. "We feed the world by first understanding how to feed our neighbors. Our farms may be smaller, but they are healthier. Our methods may be slower, but they preserve the land for our children's children. Is this not also progress?" Miriam stepped forward then, adding her perspective to her father's words. "What my father speaks of isn't just about farming methods. It's about understanding that true sustainability comes from building relationships with the land, with our community, and with future generations." The debate had transformed into a dialogue, with questions flowing naturally and responses given thoughtfully. Even the most skeptical audience members found themselves reconsidering their assumptions about progress and efficiency. Ethan, who had arrived with a story already written in his mind, now saw a different narrative emerging, one about wisdom, humility, and the unexpected teachers we meet when we open ourselves to learning. Mayor Whitman recognized that something remarkable had occurred in his community center. The divide between modern and traditional, between progress and preservation, had begun to blur. As the evening drew to a close, he noticed people lingering, forming small groups to continue the discussion, sharing experiences and perspectives that might never have emerged in a more confrontational setting. For Ethan Cole, the evening marked a profound shift in his understanding. His intended exposé on outdated farming practices had evolved into a personal journey of discovery. As he packed away his recording equipment, he caught Samuel's eye across the room. The old farmer's gentle nod carried no triumph, no sense of victory, only the same patient wisdom that had transformed an entire room of skeptics into students of a simpler, yet somehow more profound, way of seeing the world. The seeds of change, planted that evening, would continue to grow, not in the form of revolutionary farming techniques or technological advances, but in the subtle shift of perspectives and the recognition that progress sometimes means looking backward to move forward. The story of the Lancaster County Town Hall would be told and retold, not for its controversy, but for its demonstration of how wisdom can bridge the gap between tradition and modernity, between the fast-paced world of progress and the timeless rhythms of the land. The Lancaster County Community Center fell into a contemplative silence as Samuel Yoder continued sharing his perspective. His weathered hands, marked by decades of working the land, rested calmly on the podium while his voice carried across the room with quiet authority. The initial tension that had filled the space when Ethan Cole first challenged him had transformed into something entirely different. In our community, we measure progress not by the machines we acquire, but by the strength of our relationships, Samuel explained. When my grandfather taught me to plow these fields, he wasn't just teaching me farming. He was teaching me patience, perseverance, and respect for the land. How does one measure such lessons with modern metrics? Ethan Cole, who had arrived ready to challenge what he perceived as outdated practices, found himself leaning forward, his notebook forgotten in his lap. The journalist's earlier certainty about the superiority of modern farming methods began to waver as Samuel shared stories of sustainable practices that had sustained his community for generations. Last summer, when drought threatened our crops, it wasn't technology that saved us, Samuel continued. It was our neighbors, Amish and English alike, coming together. We shared water resources, helped each other repair wind pumps, and ensured no family went without. Can your efficiency algorithms measure the value of such cooperation? Mayor Carl Whitman watched as Samuel's words resonated through the crowd. The community leader had moderated many debates, but never had he witnessed such a profound shift in the room's energy. Students who had been scrolling on their phones now sat attentive, their devices forgotten in their pockets. Miriam Yoder, observing from the front row, recognized the familiar stories, but saw them anew through the audience's reactions. Her father's wisdom, usually shared over quiet family dinners or during long days in the fields, was touching people in unexpected ways. How many times had she taken these lessons for granted? We don't reject progress, Samuel explained, addressing Ethan directly. We simply ask different questions about what constitutes true advancement. When a farmer can work his land without creating debt, when children learn the value of hard work alongside their parents, when a community can sustain itself through difficult times, is this not also progress? The questions hung in the air, challenging preconceptions about efficiency and success. Local farmers in the audience exchanged knowing looks, their own struggles with modern agricultural demands suddenly cast in a new light. Business owners, who had come expecting to defend technological advancement, found themselves reconsidering their definitions of progress. Ethan Cole's initial skepticism had evolved into genuine curiosity. His prepared questions about crop yields and mechanical efficiency suddenly seemed superficial compared to the deeper insights Samuel offered. The journalist found himself wondering about the stories behind the statistics he'd so confidently quoted earlier. What human elements had his data failed to capture? Samuel's next words cut to the heart of the matter. In our simplicity, we find abundance. In our limitations, we discover creativity. In our community, we find strength. These are not relics of the past. but rather timeless truths that perhaps our modern world has forgotten in its rush toward what it calls progress. The profound silence that followed Samuel's words spoke volumes. It wasn't just respectful attention, it was the sound of perspectives shifting, of assumptions being questioned, of wisdom being recognized in unexpected places. How many other voices of experience had been dismissed in the name of progress? What other valuable insights might be waiting in communities that chose different paths? Through the windows of the community center, the setting sun cast long shadows across the Lancaster County farmland, a reminder of the enduring rhythms that had guided this community for generations. As Samuel prepared to conclude his response, the debate had transformed into something far more meaningful than a discussion about farming practices. It had become a moment of collective reflection on the true meaning of progress and wisdom. Ding. Lancaster County Community Center buzzed with tension as Ethan Cole adjusted his microphone, his polished demeanor contrasting sharply with Samuel Yoder's simple black attire. The journalist's earlier confidence began to waver as he observed the quiet dignity with which Samuel carried himself, despite the challenging questions being posed. "Mr. Yoder, how can you justify refusing modern agricultural technologies when global food demand is rising?" Ethan's question cut through the air, his tone carrying a hint of condescension. "Don't you feel a moral obligation to maximize your farm's output?" Samuel's weathered hands rested calmly on the podium as he considered the question. His response, when it came, carried the weight of generations. "Friend, these speaks of maximizing output, but what of maximizing life?" The simple question caused Ethan to pause mid-note-taking. "Our farms feed our families, our neighbors, and still produce surplus, but they also feed the soil, the birds, and the future." Mayor Carl Whitman leaned forward, intrigued by the exchange. The crowd, initially restless, grew still as Samuel continued. "When thy modern farmer speaks of efficiency, they count bushels and dollars. When we speak of efficiency, we count generations and relationships." From her seat in the front row, Miriam Yoder watched the subtle shift in Ethan's expression. The journalist's practiced skepticism began to show cracks as Samuel shared how their community had maintained consistent yields for over a century, without depleting their soil or depending on external inputs. "But surely you can't deny that modern technology could improve your yields," Ethan pressed, though his tone had lost some of its earlier edge. "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul?" Samuel quoted, not in judgment but in genuine inquiry. "Our methods may seem slow to thee, but they have sustained us through drought, through market crashes, through times when thy modern farms struggled to buy fuel for their machines." The audience, composed of both English and Amish community members, listened intently as Samuel explained how their traditional practices naturally incorporated many principles that modern sustainable agriculture was only now beginning to rediscover. He spoke of crop rotation, natural pest management, and the importance of maintaining soil health through organic matter. "We do not reject progress," Samuel clarified, his voice gentle but firm. "We ask instead, what kind of progress serves life rather than merely serving profit? What innovations strengthen our communities rather than making us dependent on distant corporations?" Ethan found himself unconsciously nodding, his prepared counter-argument suddenly seeming hollow against Samuel's lived experience. The journalist's questions began to shift from confrontational to curious, revealing a genuine interest in understanding rather than challenging. Mayor Whitman observed the transformation with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that something remarkable was unfolding. The debate had transcended its original premise, becoming instead a dialogue about what truly constitutes progress and success in agriculture. The evening air grew heavy with contemplation as Samuel shared stories of how their community had weathered various challenges through mutual aid and collective wisdom. Each anecdote served not to dismiss modern methods but to illuminate the often overlooked wisdom in traditional practices. "Perhaps," Samuel suggested, "the question is not whether we should embrace every new technology, but rather how we can best serve both the land and our children's children. What will they inherit from our choices today?" The Lancaster County Community Center buzzed with tension as Ethan Cole adjusted his microphone, his earlier confidence wavering after Samuel Yoder's unexpected eloquence. The journalists prepared. Questions about efficiency and technological advancement suddenly felt hollow against the profound simplicity of the Amish farmer's responses. Mr. Yoder, how can you justify refusing modern agricultural technologies when global food demand continues to rise? Ethan's question carried a hint of frustration, his professional demeanor showing cracks. Samuel folded his weathered hands on the table before him. Friend, thee asks about justification, but perhaps we should discuss what progress truly means. Does a faster horse always mean a better journey? His response drew murmurs from the crowd, particularly from the local farmers who had witnessed both the promises and pitfalls of industrial agriculture. Mayor Carl Whitman leaned forward in his moderator's chair, recognizing the pivotal moment unfolding. The discussion had transcended beyond a simple debate about farming methods into something more fundamental about human progress itself. Our farms feed our families and our community, Samuel continued. Each season teaches us patience. Each harvest reminds us of our dependence on forces greater than ourselves. Is this not also progress? Miriam Yoder, seated in the front row, noticed the subtle shift in Ethan's expression. The journalist's pen had stopped moving across his notepad, his eyes fixed on her father with growing curiosity rather than criticism. But surely you can't deny that modern methods produce higher yields. Ethan pressed, though his tone had lost its edge. Samuel smiled gently. In my grandfather's time, this land supported 3 families. Today, it still supports 3 families. The yield has not changed, but neither has our contentment. What metrics does thee use to measure success? The question hung in the air, challenging not just Ethan but every person in the room. A young business owner in the audience lowered his smartphone, suddenly conscious of his reflexive need to document everything. We work with the rhythms of the earth, not against them, Samuel explained. Our methods may seem slow to thee, but they have sustained us for generations without depleting the soil or poisoning the water. Is that not also innovation? Ethan found himself struggling to maintain his previous certainty about progress. The Amish farmer's words revealed a sophisticated understanding of sustainability that transcended technological solutions. How many times had he equated advancement with complexity, speed with improvement? The crowd watched as the journalist's worldview visibly shifted. Several audience members nodded in recognition of their own assumptions being challenged. A student from the local agricultural college furiously took notes, capturing not just the words but the profound implications of this exchange. But what about the future? Ethan asked, his voice softer now. How do we meet tomorrow's challenges without embracing new technologies? Samuel's response would reshape the entire conversation. Perhaps the future needs less of our embracing new things and more of our remembering old wisdom. Does thee know why we work our fields with horses instead of tractors? The question wasn't rhetorical. It was an invitation to understand a deeper truth about progress, community, and the real meaning of sustainable living. The audience leaned forward, eager to hear what would come next, while Ethan Cole found himself confronting the possibility that his definition of advancement had been far too narrow. Mayor Whitman glanced at his watch but made no move to interrupt. Some conversations transcended scheduled time slots, and this was clearly one of them. The truth being revealed here was worth every minute of overtime, as an entire community grappled with fundamental questions about progress, purpose, and the path forward. The Lancaster County Community Center buzzed with renewed energy as Samuel Yoder rose from his wooden chair. His weathered hands, calloused from decades of working the land, rested quietly on the podium. The crowd, which had moments ago been restless with whispers and murmurs, fell into an expectant silence. Friend, Samuel addressed Ethan Cole directly, his voice carrying a gentle authority that commanded attention. Thee speaks of progress as if it only moves in one direction. But what if progress isn't always about moving forward? What if sometimes it's about standing still long enough to see what we already have? Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier confidence wavering as Samuel continued. On our farm, we work with the rhythms of the earth, not against them. When the soil needs rest, we let it rest. When the horses tire, we stop. This isn't backwards thinking. It's understanding that everything has its own time and pace. The journalist opened his mouth to interject, but Samuel's next words gave him pause. Last summer, during the Great Drought, many of our English neighbors lost their crops because their irrigation systems failed when the power went out. But our windmills kept turning, our hand pumps kept working, and our community came together, as we've always done. Is this not also a form of sustainability? From her seat in the front row, Miriam Yoder watched her father with quiet pride. She noticed how the audience leaned forward, hanging on every word. Even the skeptical college students who had come to support Ethan's modern viewpoint were now listening intently. "We don't reject progress," Samuel explained, his words measured and thoughtful. "We ask instead, will this change strengthen or weaken our community? Will it bring us closer together or push us apart? These are the questions that matter most." Mayor Whitman, who had been preparing to moderate what he expected would be a heated debate, found himself instead witnessing a master class in wisdom. The tension that had filled the room earlier had transformed into something else entirely, a shared moment of reflection. Samuel shared stories of his grandfather teaching him to read weather patterns in the sky, of children learning patience while waiting for horses to rest, of neighbors raising barns together without the need for power tools or machinery. Each tale illustrated not just survival, but a deep understanding of sustainable living that had been refined over generations. "In your world," Samuel addressed the room, "when something breaks, you replace it. In our world, we fix it. When the harvest is lean, we share what we have. When a neighbor struggles, we help them rebuild. These are not primitive choices. They are conscious ones." The power of Samuel's words lay not in their complexity, but in their simple truth. He wasn't arguing against modern technology. He was demonstrating how traditional wisdom could offer solutions to contemporary challenges. How did his community maintain such strong bonds in an age of increasing isolation? What could their approach to resource management teach about genuine sustainability? As Samuel concluded his response, the silence in the room felt different, contemplative rather than tense. Ethan Cole, who had arrived ready to challenge what he saw as outdated practices, found himself questioning his own assumptions about progress. Could there be wisdom in these traditional methods that modern society had overlooked in its rush toward technological advancement? The debate had transformed into something more meaningful than a clash between old and new. It had become a bridge between two worlds, each with valuable lessons to teach the other. What would happen when these two perspectives finally found common ground? The answer to that question was about to unfold in ways none of them could have predicted. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the tension in the town hall began to dissipate following Samuel Yoder's profound insights, his daughter Miriam stepped forward, her presence adding a new dimension to the conversation. Having grown up straddling two worlds, the traditional Amish lifestyle and occasional interactions with modern society, she possessed a unique ability to bridge the gap between her father's wisdom and the contemporary audience. "What my father speaks of isn't just about farming methods," Miriam explained, her voice carrying the same measured tone as Samuel's. "It's about understanding the interconnectedness of all things. When we reject certain modern technologies, it isn't out of ignorance or fear, but from a deep appreciation of what we might lose in embracing them." Ethan Cole, who had been unusually quiet since Samuel's earlier response, leaned forward in his chair. His initial skepticism had given way to genuine curiosity. "But how can you be certain you're not missing out on innovations that could make your lives better?" Miriam smiled, her eyes meeting those of various audience members before settling on Ethan. "Perhaps the question isn't about what we're missing, but what we're preserving. When we milk our cows by hand, we notice changes in their health immediately. When we plow our fields with horses, we feel the soil's condition beneath our feet. These aren't just farming techniques, they're relationships," the crowd murmured, thoughtfully as Mayor Carl Whitman nodded in appreciation. He had moderated many debates in this hall, but few had achieved this level of meaningful dialogue. A young farmer in the audience raised his hand, asking how the Amish community maintained profitable farms without modern equipment. Profit isn't measured solely in dollars, Miriam responded, glancing at her father, who beamed with quiet pride. Our community shares equipment, labor, and knowledge. When someone needs help, we all come together. This creates a wealth that can't be calculated. On a spreadsheet, Ethan found himself scribbling notes furiously, his perspective shifting with each example Miriam provided. She explained how their methods of crop rotation and natural pest control had been refined over generations, often achieving results that matched or exceeded those of chemical-intensive farming. We don't reject progress, Miriam continued. We simply ask different questions about what constitutes progress. Is it faster production, or is it sustainable community? Is it higher yields this year, or is it soil that will nourish generations to come? A student from the local agricultural college raised her hand, asking about climate change adaptation. Miriam's response highlighted how traditional Amish farming practices naturally incorporated many of the principles modern agriculture was now scrambling to adopt: diversity in crops, minimal soil disturbance, and locally adapted varieties. The discussion evolved into an exchange of ideas rather than a debate, with Miriam skillfully weaving between technical farming concepts and broader philosophical implications. She helped translate her father's wisdom into terms that resonated with both traditional farmers and modern agricultural experts in the audience. Throughout the exchange, Samuel remained seated, allowing his daughter to serve as this crucial bridge between worlds. His weathered hands rested calmly in his lap, his presence a testament to the very values being discussed. When Miriam spoke of patience, resilience, and community, the audience could see these qualities embodied in both father and daughter. As the evening progressed, what had begun as a confrontational debate about farming methods had transformed into something far more meaningful: a dialogue about values, community, and the true meaning of progress. Through Miriam's articulate translations of her father's wisdom, even the most skeptical audience members began to understand that sometimes, moving forward might mean looking back to what we've left behind. The Lancaster County Community Center buzzed with renewed energy as Samuel Yoder's initial response sparked unexpected curiosity among the attendees. Ethan Cole, who had arrived with preconceived notions about the Amish way of life, found himself confronted with layers of complexity he hadn't anticipated. But how can you possibly maintain soil health without modern testing equipment? Ethan pressed, his notebook forgotten in his hand. Surely your yields must suffer compared to conventional farms. Samuel's weathered face creased into a thoughtful expression. Friend, we test our soil every day, though perhaps not in the way thee might expect. When I walk my fields each morning, I feel the earth between my fingers. The worms tell me about soil health, the plants show me where attention is needed, and the rotation of our crops maintains balance naturally. A local agricultural extension agent in the audience raised her hand. Mr. Yoder is correct. Recent studies have shown that Amish farms often demonstrate superior soil organic matter content compared to many conventional operations. Their methods, while traditional, align with many modern regenerative agriculture principles. Ethan's brow furrowed. But what about record keeping? How do you track your progress without computers? Miriam Yoder stepped forward, her plain dress a stark contrast to her articulate presentation. Our community maintains detailed written records going back generations. Every farmer knows the history of each field, what grew well, what didn't, and why. This knowledge passes from father to son, mother to daughter, neighbor to neighbor. Mayor. Whitman observed the exchange with growing interest, noting how the audience leaned forward in their seats. The expected confrontation had transformed into something more nuanced, a revelation of sophisticated agricultural knowledge wrapped in simplicity. What about climate change? Ethan challenged. How can your methods possibly address modern environmental challenges? Samuel's response carried the weight of generations. Our farms produce no carbon from electricity because we use none. Our horses require no fossil fuels. Our small fields surrounded by hedgerows protect wildlife and maintain diversity. We didn't set out to be environmentally friendly. We simply continued the ways that have always worked. A young environmental science student in the audience stood up. I've been studying sustainable agriculture, and the Amish methods actually incorporate many principles we're only now beginning to understand scientifically, like the importance of soil microbiomes and integrated pest management through natural predator relationships. The complexity of Amish agricultural practices continued to unfold, challenging the stereotype of simple farmers stuck in the past. Their methods revealed sophisticated understanding of ecological relationships, sustainable resource management, and community-based problem-solving that many modern operations struggled to achieve. As the discussion deepened, Ethan found himself repeatedly surprised by the hidden depths of knowledge within the Amish community. Each simple answer Samuel provided contained layers of wisdom that connected to cutting-edge environmental science, economic resilience, and social sustainability. The journalist's questions began to shift from confrontational challenges to genuine curiosity about how these traditional methods might inform modern agricultural challenges. The audience witnessed this transformation as what began as a debate about the superiority of modern farming techniques evolved into an exploration of how different approaches to agriculture might complement each other. Mayor Whitman noticed how the tension in the room had been replaced by thoughtful consideration, with audience members from both traditional and modern farming backgrounds engaging in productive dialogue. What would emerge from this unexpected meeting of worlds? How might this bridge between traditional wisdom and modern challenges reshape the future of farming in Lancaster County and beyond? The Lancaster County Community Center buzzed with anticipation as Samuel Yoder took his turn at the podium. His weathered hands rested gently on the wooden surface, a stark contrast to Ethan Cole's earlier aggressive grip on the same spot. The crowd, which had grown increasingly tense during the journalist's critical remarks about traditional farming methods, now leaned forward in their seats. "Friend," Samuel addressed Ethan directly, his voice carrying the gentle authority of decades spent working the land. "Thee speaks of efficiency and modern solutions. But what is efficiency without understanding?" He paused, allowing the question to settle in the room. "Our methods have sustained families for generations, not just in crop yields, but in teaching our children the value of honest work and respect for God's creation." Samuel shared how their farming practices had evolved through careful observation and accumulated wisdom. He explained their crop rotation systems, developed over centuries, which naturally enriched the soil without chemical fertilizers. The farmer described their method of using draft horses, which prevented soil compression caused by heavy machinery and allowed for more precise cultivation in smaller spaces. Ethan Cole, who had arrived with statistics about industrial farming yields, found himself confronting a different kind of data, the kind that couldn't be measured in mere bushels per acre. Samuel spoke of how their methods preserved groundwater quality, maintained biodiversity, and created resilient food systems that could weather economic downturns without relying on external inputs. Mayor Carl Whitman, who had been prepared to intervene if the debate became heated, found himself captivated by Samuel's measured responses. The farmer's words carried no defensive tone, no attempt to prove superiority. Instead, they reflected generations of careful stewardship and practical wisdom. Miriam Yoder, watching from the audience, noticed how her father's quiet confidence affected the crowd. Business owners who had arrived skeptical of outdated farming methods now nodded thoughtfully. Students who had been scrolling through their phones set them aside, drawn in by Samuel's authentic connection to the land. "We do not reject progress," Samuel continued, addressing a core misconception. "We embrace progress that serves our values and strengthens our community. Each spring we gather as families to plant together. Each harvest, our children learn from their grandparents. What modern machine can teach these lessons?" The discussion shifted from a debate about farming techniques to a deeper exploration of sustainability, not just environmental, but cultural and spiritual as well. Samuel shared how their methods had helped them weather the 2008 financial crisis without taking on debt, and how their community-based approach ensured no family went hungry during recent supply chain disruptions. Ethan Cole's expression transformed. From skepticism to genuine curiosity, as Samuel explained the intricate ways their farming practices preserved soil health. The journalist had arrived ready to challenge what he perceived as technological resistance, but instead encountered a sophisticated understanding of ecological systems that challenged his own assumptions about progress. Through Samuel's words, the audience began to understand that Amish farming wasn't simply about refusing modern conveniences. It was about maintaining a delicate balance between human needs and natural systems. His explanation revealed how their methods protected beneficial insects, promoted natural pest control, and maintained soil fertility without external inputs. The farmer's voice carried no judgment as he described how their approach had allowed them to farm the same land for generations without depleting it. Instead, he offered his experience as simply another way of understanding the relationship between humans and the land they cultivate. What had begun as a confrontation about farming practices was evolving into a masterclass in sustainable agriculture and community resilience. How could modern agricultural science incorporate these time-tested wisdom without losing the benefits of technological advancement? This question hung in the air as Samuel continued to share the deep knowledge embedded in traditional farming practices, challenging everyone present to reconsider their assumptions about progress and efficiency. Ethan Cole shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Samuel Yoder's steady gaze met his own. The journalist's earlier confidence had begun to waver, particularly as Samuel delved into the hidden costs of what many called progress. The Lancaster County Community Center fell silent, hanging on every measured word from the elderly Amish farmer. "What does thy modern farm gain in efficiency? It often loses in soul," Samuel began, his voice carrying clearly despite its softness. "When a farmer no longer walks his fields daily, how does he know the song of his soil?" The question lingered in the air, causing several local farmers in the audience to nod in recognition. Ethan leaned forward, his journalistic instincts detecting a deeper story emerging. "But surely the increased productivity justifies the environmental impact. We can feed more people with modern methods," he challenged, though his tone had lost its earlier edge. Samuel's response came with the patience of one who had spent decades observing the rhythms of nature. "In our community, we measure wealth differently. When thy neighbor's barn burns down, can a machine rebuild it? When drought comes, will technology share its water?" He paused, allowing the implications to sink in. "Our methods may seem slow to thee, but they preserve something precious. The bonds between neighbors, the understanding that we are all stewards, not owners." Mayor Carl Whitman, who had been quietly moderating the debate, found himself drawn into the farmer's perspective. He had witnessed firsthand how the Amish community's mutual aid system had helped families weather economic downturns that had devastated other farms in the region. From her seat in the front row, Miriam Yoder watched the subtle transformation occurring in the room. She recognized the moment when understanding began to dawn in Ethan's eyes, the same realization she had seen in others who initially questioned their way of life. "Father," she interjected gently, "perhaps you could explain about last summer's drought?" Samuel nodded, his weathered hands folded carefully in his lap. "When the rains failed last summer, our English neighbors with their irrigation systems continued to water their crops. But the wells began to run dry." He looked directly at Ethan. "Our fields yielded less, yes, but we shared what we had. Every family in our community had food on their table through winter. Can thy technology guarantee such security?" The question prompted murmurs of agreement from several local business owners in the audience who had witnessed the community's resilience firsthand. One of them, owner of the local feed store, nodded vigorously, remembering how the Amish families had helped each other harvest what crops they could, ensuring no one went without. "But what about climate change?" Ethan pressed, though his voice had lost its confrontational edge. "Modern farming techniques could help adapt to changing conditions." Samuel's response revealed the depth of his understanding of both natural systems and human nature. "We have always adapted to change, but adaptation without wisdom brings new problems. When thy modern farmer must buy new seeds each year because they cannot reproduce, is this progress? When the soil requires more chemicals each season to produce the same yield, who truly profits?" The questions resonated through the community center, causing several audience members to exchange thoughtful glances. Even those who had arrived skeptical of traditional farming methods found themselves reconsidering their assumptions about progress and efficiency. Mayor Whitman observed the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. What had begun as a debate about farming methods had evolved into a deeper discussion about community resilience and the true meaning of sustainability. The cost of progress, as Samuel was quietly demonstrating, couldn't be measured solely in bushels per acre or quarterly profits. As Samuel continued to share his perspective, Ethan found himself taking notes with increasing urgency, though not for the story he had originally planned to write. The journalist was beginning to understand that the real story wasn't about the rejection of modern methods, but about preserving something far more fundamental to human existence: the delicate balance between progress and wisdom, between efficiency and community, between growth and sustainability. The wisdom of generations of farmers, passed down through careful observation and respect for natural systems, was challenging the assumptions of modern agricultural science. How many other valuable insights, Ethan wondered, had been overlooked in the rush toward technological solutions? What other costs of progress had remained hidden beneath the surface of efficiency metrics and productivity reports? The Lancaster County Community Center buzzed with a different energy now, as Samuel Yoder's measured responses had shifted the tone from confrontational to contemplative. Ethan Cole, who had arrived ready to challenge what he perceived as outdated practices, found himself listening with increasing attention to the elderly Amish farmer's perspective on community. In your world, Mr. Cole, how many neighbors would come to your aid if your barn needed raising? Samuel asked, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed room. How many would bring food to your family if you fell ill? Who would help tend your crops if you broke your leg? The questions hung in the air, causing several audience members to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Ethan opened his mouth to respond but found himself without a ready answer. In the silence, Samuel continued, his words carrying the weight of lived experience. Last summer, when lightning struck the Miller family's barn, our community had it, rebuilt in 3 days. No contracts, no insurance claims, no bureaucracy, just neighbors helping neighbors. Samuel's eyes swept across the room, connecting with various community members who nodded in recognition. We didn't need social media to organize it, or modern equipment to accomplish it. We needed only willing hands and open hearts. Mayor Carl Whitman leaned forward in his chair, clearly intrigued by this perspective. The town hall debate had evolved into something far more meaningful than a simple discussion about farming practices. From her seat in the front row, Miriam, Yoder watched as understanding began to dawn on various faces in the crowd. But surely that's inefficient, Ethan interjected, though his tone had lost its earlier edge. Modern systems can handle these challenges more effectively. Samuel's response came with gentle authority. What is the cost of this efficiency? When we solve every problem with money and machines, do we not lose something more valuable? Our children learn responsibility by helping their neighbors. Our elderly remain vital parts of the community, rather than being shuffled away to retirement homes. Every member has purpose and belonging. A local business owner in the audience raised her hand, sharing how she had noticed the declining sense of community in the town over the past decades. Others began nodding in agreement, recognizing the truth in Samuel's words. The conversation had transcended the initial debate about farming methods, touching on something far more fundamental about human connection and mutual support. Ethan found himself taking notes, not to craft a critical piece about backward practices, but to capture insights about what modern society might have sacrificed in its rush toward progress. The journalist who had arrived seeking to expose the flaws in traditional ways was instead discovering blind spots in his own worldview. We are not perfect, Samuel acknowledged, his humility adding weight to his words. But we understand that a community's strength lies not in its technologies, but in its relationships. When we work together, share our burdens, and celebrate our joys as one, we create something that no machine can replace. As the evening progressed, the discussion evolved into a broader exploration of how traditional values might offer solutions to modern problems. Mayor Whitman observed with satisfaction as bridges of understanding began to form between different segments of the community. transcending the artificial divide between progress and tradition. The town hall debate shifted as Ethan Cole pressed forward with his critique of Amish farming methods, brandishing statistics about modern agricultural yields and efficiency metrics on his tablet. How can you justify refusing technologies that could increase your productivity by over 300%? He challenged, directing his question at Samuel Yoder. Samuel adjusted his suspenders thoughtfully before responding. Friend, these speaks of productivity, as if it were the only measure of success. But what does it profit a farmer to gain the whole harvest and lose his connection to the land? His words carried the weight of generations of experience, causing several audience members to lean forward. In their seats, Ethan's brow furrowed as he prepared his counter-argument, but Samuel continued. In our community, we have observed that each new technology brings not only benefits, but also unforeseen consequences. When our neighbors adopted automated milking systems, they could manage larger herds. But did thee know many of them no longer recognize when a cow is sick just by looking at her? They rely on computers to tell them what their own eyes once knew. The journalist's fingers hovered over his tablet, ready to fact-check this claim, but something in Samuel's tone made him pause. Mayor Carl Whitman watched the exchange with growing interest, noting how the dynamic in the room had shifted from confrontational to contemplative. We see similar patterns with soil testing, Samuel explained. Modern farmers send samples to laboratories waiting weeks for results. We know our soil by touch, smell, and the health of our crops. When the earth speaks, we listen directly, not through an intermediary device. Miriam Yoder, standing near her father, added her perspective. I've studied both methods during my Rumspringa. What we've found is that technology often creates distance between farmer and land, between neighbor and neighbor. Every hour spent maintaining machinery or updating software is an hour not spent in community or in prayer. A local farmer in the audience raised his hand. Mr. Cole, I run a modern operation, but Samuel's got a point. Last month my entire system went down during planting season. Cost me thousands in repairs and lost time. The Amish neighbors helped me plant manually while I waited for the technician. Ethan found himself confronting an unexpected reality, one where efficiency metrics failed to capture the full picture of agricultural success. But surely there must be a middle ground, he suggested, his earlier certainty wavering. Samuel nodded sagely. There always is, friend. We do not reject progress out of ignorance, but choose our tools with careful consideration of their true costs. Not just in dollars, but in relationships, in knowledge passed down, in the wisdom of working with nature rather than attempting to control it. The crowd murmured thoughtfully as Samuel shared an example that struck at the heart of modern assumptions. Last summer during the drought, farms with irrigation systems continued spraying water while their wells ran low. Our community gathered to pray for rain, yes, but we also shared our generations-old techniques for moisture conservation. We lost some crops, but our wells remained strong and we helped each other through. Can thy technology measure the value of such community resilience? The question hung in the air, challenging not just Ethan's assumptions about agricultural progress, but the very notion of what constitutes advancement. The journalist found himself contemplating how many modern solutions created new dependencies while solving old problems. What price was paid for each technological leap forward? And more importantly, what wisdom might be lost in the rush to embrace the new while discarding the old? The Lancaster County Community Center buzzed with anticipation as Ethan Cole adjusted his microphone, preparing to address what he considered the most contentious point of the evening's debate. His research had led him to believe that traditional Amish farming methods were inherently unsustainable in a world facing climate change and growing food demands. How could anyone argue against the clear benefits of precision agriculture, GPS-guided tractors, and data-driven farming? Mr. Yoder, Ethan began, his voice carrying a hint of condescension. How do you justify refusing modern agricultural technologies when studies show they can reduce water waste by up to 30% and increase crop yield significantly? Samuel Yoder stood slowly, his weathered hands resting gently on the podium. The crowd leaned forward, expecting perhaps an awkward defense of outdated methods. Instead, Samuel's response carried an unexpected weight of empirical observation. "Friend, these speaks of water conservation," Samuel began, his voice steady and clear. "On our farm, we've maintained the same deep topsoil for generations, while many modern farms lose inches each decade to erosion. Our methods of crop rotation, natural fertilization, and working with horses rather than heavy machinery have actually increased our soil's water retention capacity. Would thee like to know our water usage per acre compared to conventional farms?" The journalist's expression shifted slightly as Samuel proceeded to quote precise figures from recent university studies of Amish farms. These studies had found that traditional methods often matched or exceeded modern farming and sustainability metrics, though through different means. Miriam Yoder, sitting in the front row, noticed the subtle change in the room's atmosphere. The initial skepticism was giving way to genuine curiosity. She watched as her father explained how their community's farming practices had evolved over centuries, through careful observation and collective wisdom. "We don't reject change for its own sake," Samuel continued, addressing the broader audience. "Now, we ask, will this change strengthen or weaken our community? Will it make us more or less dependent on outside forces we cannot control? When we use horses instead of tractors, we're not just avoiding technology. We're maintaining skills that cannot be disrupted by fuel shortages or computer failures." Mayor Carl Whitman, who had been moderating the debate with practiced neutrality, found himself nodding unconsciously. He had seen both worlds, the high-tech farms with their impressive machinery and the Amish farms with their seemingly simple methods. But Samuel's words were revealing layers of complexity in that simplicity. A local organic farmer in the audience raised her hand. "Mr. Yoder, could you explain your pest management techniques? I've noticed your fields seem less affected by the beetle infestations we've been fighting." Samuel's response illuminated another dimension of traditional wisdom. He described their integrated pest management system, a complex web of companion planting, natural predator encouragement, and crop rotation that had evolved through generations of careful observation. This system had proven more resilient than chemical solutions, which often led to resistant pest populations. Ethan Cole found himself taking detailed notes, his initial skepticism transforming into genuine interest. The backward farming methods he had come to criticize were revealing themselves to be sophisticated systems of sustainable agriculture, developed through centuries of practical experience and community knowledge. The discussion continued, touching on soil health, biodiversity, and community resilience. With each point, Samuel demonstrated how traditional methods often achieved modern sustainability goals through time-tested practices rather than technological solutions. The wisdom of these approaches wasn't just in their environmental impact, but in their ability to maintain independence and community strength while working in harmony with natural systems. As the evening progressed, the debate transformed into something more like a masterclass in sustainable agriculture, with Samuel Yoder as the unexpected professor. The audience, including skeptical modern farmers and curious students, began to see how traditional wisdom could offer solutions to contemporary challenges. What had begun as a confrontation about the past versus the future was becoming a dialogue about finding balance between tradition and innovation. The town hall debate took an unexpected turn when Ethan Cole shifted his focus to question the lack of individual autonomy within the Amish community. "How can you justify restricting personal choices in the name of tradition?" he challenged, directing his question toward Samuel Yoder. The crowd tensed, anticipating confrontation. Samuel adjusted his plain black hat and responded with characteristic thoughtfulness. "In our community, we do not see it as restriction, but as conscious choice. Each person, when they reach adulthood, makes their own decision to stay or leave. We call it Rumspringa, a time when our young people can experience the outside world and choose their path." Miriam Yoder, sitting in the front row, nodded in agreement. Her own experience during Rumspringa had strengthened her commitment to the Amish way of life. Though she understood both worlds intimately, she raised her hand and Mayor Whitman acknowledged her contribution to the discussion. "What many don't realize," Miriam explained, "is that our lifestyle is built on voluntary commitment, not forced compliance. Every year, the majority of our young people choose to return and be baptized into the faith, despite having experienced modern conveniences. Ethan leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. But surely the pressure from family and community influences these decisions. How can you call it true freedom? Samuel's response carried the weight of generations. Is there not pressure in thy world too, Mr. Cole? The pressure to consume, to upgrade, to stay connected at all times. We choose our pressures, as does everyone. Ours push us toward community, simplicity, and mindful living. What do your pressures push toward? The question hung in the air, causing several audience members to shift uncomfortably in their seats. A local business owner in the crowd raised his hand, sharing how his smartphone notifications had begun controlling his daily schedule, making him question who truly had more freedom. Mayor Whitman observed the discussion with growing interest, noting how Samuel's gentle questioning was prompting genuine self-reflection among the attendees. The debate had transformed from a confrontational exchange into a thoughtful exploration of personal agency and societal influences. Samuel continued, "Freedom isn't about having endless choices, but about having the wisdom to choose what truly matters. We have chosen to limit certain influences not because we fear them, but because we have found deeper satisfaction without them." A college student in the audience asked about the apparent contradiction between rejection of technology and personal liberty. Samuel's response illuminated the complexity of their approach. We do not reject progress blindly. Each new technology is evaluated by our community for its impact on our relationships, our faith, and our way of life. Sometimes the choice to say no requires more freedom than the automatic yes. The discussion evolved to explore how the Amish community's deliberate approach to adoption of new practices might offer insights for a world grappling with technological overwhelm. Ethan found himself reconsidering his initial assumptions about freedom and constraint, particularly as Samuel shared stories of community members who had found liberation in simplicity. Through the exchange, the audience began to understand that the Amish approach to personal choice wasn't about restriction, but about intentional living. The conversation challenged the modern equation of freedom with unlimited options, suggesting, instead, that true liberty might lie in the conscious selection of limitations that enhance rather than diminish human connection and purpose. As the debate continued, even the most skeptical attendees found themselves questioning their own relationships with technology and choice. The discussion had moved beyond simple arguments about tradition versus progress, delving into deeper questions about the nature of freedom itself and how different communities might define and pursue it. The Lancaster County Community Center buzzed with anticipation as Ethan Cole shifted his focus to what he considered his strongest argument against traditional Amish farming methods. Mr. Yoder, how can you justify refusing modern agricultural science when studies clearly show increased yields and efficiency through technological advancement? Samuel Yoder's weathered hands rested calmly on the podium as he considered the question. His response began not with statistics or defensive rhetoric, but with a simple query of his own. Tell me, Mr. Cole, how many generations of farmers have worked your family's land? The question caught Ethan off guard. I'm not from a farming background. I studied agricultural economics at Columbia University. I see, Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Our farm has been in my family for 7 generations. Each father has taught his son, and each mother has taught her daughter. What we know comes not just from books but from the soil itself, from the changing seasons, from countless successes and failures passed down through time. Mayor Whitman leaned forward, intrigued by this unexpected turn in the conversation. The audience, which had been restless moments before, grew still as Samuel continued. When my grandfather taught me to read the sky for coming storms, he wasn't just sharing weather prediction. He was passing down wisdom that had kept our family fed through drought and flood. When my father showed me how to work with our draft horses, he taught me patience and the importance of treating all God's creatures with respect. Miriam Yoder, sitting in the front row, noticed how her father's words resonated with the younger farmers in the audience. She saw heads nodding among those who had inherited their own family farms, recognizing the value of knowledge passed down through generations. Modern science tells us what chemicals to put on our fields, but our methods tell us how to keep the soil alive for our children's children, Samuel explained. "We don't reject progress, Mr. Cole. We simply understand that progress doesn't always mean replacing the old with the new. Sometimes it means preserving what works, what has always worked." Ethan found himself struggling to maintain his previous certainty. "But surely there must be some scientific innovations that could benefit your community without compromising your values?" "Perhaps," Samuel acknowledged. "But who better to judge that than those who have lived in harmony with the land for generations? Each choice we make isn't just about today's harvest. It's about ensuring our children inherit both the knowledge and the fertile soil they'll need tomorrow." The discussion had transformed from a debate about farming techniques into something deeper, a reflection on the value of inherited wisdom and the responsibility of stewardship. Even the most skeptical audience members found themselves reconsidering their assumptions about progress and tradition. How many other forms of wisdom, they wondered, had been lost in the rush to embrace the new? What other valuable lessons might be hidden in the practices modern society had been so quick to dismiss as outdated? These questions hung in the air as Samuel's words settled over the assembly, challenging not just Ethan's perspective, but everyone's understanding of what it truly meant to be progressive. The Lancaster County Community Center buzzed with anticipation as Ethan Cole adjusted his microphone, his polished demeanor contrasting sharply with Samuel Yoder's simple black attire. The journalist's recent article criticizing traditional farming methods had sparked considerable controversy, leading to this unexpected confrontation. "Mr. Yoder," Ethan began, his voice carrying a hint of condescension, "how do you justify refusing modern agricultural technologies when studies show they could triple your yield?" The question hung in the air as Samuel thoughtfully stroked his beard, his weathered hands telling stories of decades spent working the land. "Friend," Samuel responded, his voice quiet but clear, "perhaps we should first discuss what we mean by efficiency. Does efficiency only mean quantity, or should we consider what we lose in pursuit of more?" His question caught Ethan off guard, causing him to shift slightly in his chair. Mayor Carl Whitman leaned forward, intrigued by the unexpected direction of the discourse. The crowd, initially restless, grew still as Samuel continued. "In thy world, progress means replacing the old with the new. But in our way, progress means perfecting what we already know works." Ethan pressed on. "But surely you can't deny that modern farming techniques are more sustainable?" A murmur rippled through the audience, but Samuel remained unruffled. His daughter Miriam, seated in the front row, noticed how her father's calm demeanor seemed to affect even the most skeptical observers. "What does sustainable truly mean?" Samuel asked, his eyes meeting Ethan's. "Our farms have fed families for generations without depleting the soil. We use no electricity, no chemicals, and our children learn to work alongside us from an early age. Is that not sustainable?" The journalist opened his mouth to respond but found himself reconsidering his words. Samuel's question had exposed an assumption about progress that Ethan had never examined. The crowd watched as the typically verbose reporter struggled to formulate a response. "We have not rejected progress," Samuel continued. "We have chosen a different path. Each spring, we plant by hand, not because we fear machines, but because we understand that some connections cannot be replaced by convenience. When thy tractor breaks, thee must call a specialist. When my plow needs repair, my neighbors gather to help, strengthening our community." A local farmer in the audience nodded, slowly recognition dawning on his face. He had recently spent thousands of dollars repairing a GPS-guided harvester, while his Amish neighbors had completed their harvest through collective effort. Miriam observed the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. The initial tension had given way to something else, a growing appreciation for the wisdom in her father's words. She noticed how Ethan's expression had changed from superiority to genuine curiosity. "But what about feeding the world's growing population?" Ethan asked, his tone now more inquiring than challenging. "How can traditional methods address global food security?" Samuel's response was measured and thoughtful. "We must ask ourselves, has the rush to produce more led us to forget how to produce better? When we focus only on quantity, we risk losing the knowledge that ensures our children's children will still have fertile soil to farm." The discussion continued, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. What began as a debate about farming methods had evolved into a deeper examination of progress, sustainability, and the true meaning of efficiency. The audience, composed of both traditional and modern farmers, found themselves questioning their own assumptions about advancement and success. As Mayor Whitman observed the exchange, he realized that this conversation was revealing something profound about the nature of progress itself. The question was no longer about choosing between old and new, but about understanding the true cost and value of each choice. How many other modern improvements might benefit from such careful examination? The Lancaster County Community Center buzzed with anticipation as Ethan Cole adjusted his microphone, preparing to challenge Samuel Yoder's traditional farming methods. Mr. Yoder, how can you justify using practices that yield less produce per acre when modern technology could feed so many more people? The question hung in the air, delivered with the practiced precision of a journalist who had cornered countless subjects before. Samuel Yoder stood slowly, his weathered hands resting gently on the podium. His response began, not with defense, but with a question of his own. Friend, what does the soil tell thee when thou walks thy fields? The unexpected query caught Ethan off guard, causing him to furrow his brow in confusion. The soil doesn't tell me anything, Mr. Yoder. We have soil testing kits and agricultural analysis for that, Ethan replied, a hint of condescension in his voice. The crowd shifted in their seats, some nodding in agreement, others waiting expectantly for Samuel's response. Samuel's eyes crinkled at the corners as he continued. When I walk my fields each morning, my boots sink into earth that 3 generations of my family have tended. Every step tells a story. Where the water pools after rain, which areas warm first in spring, how the worms move through healthy soil. He paused, allowing his words to settle. Does thy computer tell thee when the ground is ready for planting by its smell? Can thy machines feel the difference between soil that nurtures and soil that merely holds plants upright? Miriam Yoder, watching from the front row, noticed the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. Her father wasn't just defending their way of life. He was revealing its deeper wisdom. The audience leaned forward, drawn in by Samuel's quiet authority and the unexpected depth of his knowledge. We don't farm against nature, but with it, Samuel continued. Each season teaches us patience. Each crop shows us humility. When the drought comes, we learn to adapt, not by forcing the land to bend to our will, but by understanding its rhythms. His words carried no judgment, only the weight of lived experience. Mayor Carl Whitman, who had been maintaining his neutral stance, found himself nodding unconsciously. He had moderated countless debates in this hall, but never had he witnessed such a profound shift in the conversation's tone. The discussion was no longer about efficiency versus tradition. It had evolved into something far more fundamental, about humanity's relationship with the land. Ethan Cole's notebook lay forgotten in his lap, as Samuel spoke about the interconnectedness of all things on a farm, how the health of the soil affected the strength of the plants, which in turn influenced the vitality of those who ate from it. The journalist's carefully prepared arguments about productivity metrics and technological solutions suddenly seemed shallow in comparison to this deeper understanding of agricultural stewardship. A student in the audience raised her hand, asking Samuel how his methods could possibly compete with modern farming techniques. Samuel's response was characteristically thoughtful. What does it mean to compete? If we measure success only in bushels and dollars, perhaps we lose sight of what the land itself requires of us. Our farms feed our families, support our neighbors, and leave the earth better for the next generation. Is this not also a form of success? The wisdom in Samuel's words transcended the immediate debate about farming practices, touching on fundamental questions about progress, sustainability, and the meaning of true prosperity. As he spoke, even those who had arrived skeptical of traditional methods found themselves reconsidering their assumptions about what constituted advanced agricultural practice. How many other aspects of modern life, they began to wonder, might benefit from this kind of deeper, more contemplative approach? What other wisdom might be hidden in practices that at first glance appeared outdated or inefficient? These questions rippled through the audience, transforming what had begun as a confrontational debate into a moment of collective reflection. The Lancaster County Community Center buzzed with anticipation as Samuel Yoder stood at the podium, his weathered hands resting gently on its edges. The stark contrast between his simple black attire and Ethan Cole's tailored suit seemed to underscore the fundamental divide in their perspectives. Yet it was Samuel's quiet presence that commanded attention, not through volume or gestures, but through an innate authenticity that filled the room. "Mr. Cole speaks of efficiency and progress," Samuel began, his voice steady and measured. "But what is true efficiency? Is it merely the speed at which we can extract from the earth, or is it something deeper?" The question hung in the air, causing several audience members to lean forward in their seats. Ethan Cole had just finished a passionate argument about modern farming techniques, complete with statistics and projections. However, Samuel's response took an unexpected turn. Instead of defending his methods with numbers, he shared a story about 3 generations of his family working together during the previous year's harvest. The tale wasn't just about gathering crops. It revealed how their traditional methods preserved soil health, maintained community bonds, and ensured knowledge passed naturally from one generation to the next. As Samuel spoke, Miriam Yoder watched from her seat in the front row, noticing how her father's words affected the crowd. The skeptical expressions that had greeted his approach to the podium gradually softened. Even Mayor Whitman, known for his diplomatic poker face, found himself nodding in agreement. "We measure success differently," Samuel continued. "When my grandson can name every plant in our fields, when my daughter knows exactly how the soil should feel between her fingers during planting season, when our community comes together to raise a barn, these are our metrics of progress." His words carried no judgment, only a gentle invitation to consider a different perspective. The power of Samuel's message lay not in what he opposed, but in what he affirmed. He spoke of sustainability, not as a modern innovation, but as an ancient wisdom passed down through generations. His description of farming without electricity or modern machinery wasn't a rejection of progress, but rather a testament to the enduring effectiveness of time-tested methods. Ethan Cole, who had arrived ready to challenge what he perceived as backward thinking, found himself confronting an unexpected reality. The wisdom before him wasn't rooted in ignorance or fear of change, but in a deep understanding of natural cycles and human connection. How could he argue against practices that had sustained families and land for centuries? The journalist's notepad, filled with pointed questions and counterarguments, remained untouched on the podium. Instead, Ethan found himself listening with growing respect as Samuel explained how their traditional methods naturally incorporated principles that modern agriculture was only beginning to rediscover: crop rotation, soil preservation, and sustainable water management. Throughout the hall, the atmosphere had shifted. Local business owners who had come expecting to hear arguments for modernization found themselves reconsidering their assumptions. Students who had initially rolled their eyes at the sight of the plain-dressed farmer now typed furiously on their phones, capturing his words. The crowd's silence wasn't born of boredom or confusion, but of profound attention to truths that transcended the usual debates about progress versus tradition. Mayor Whitman, observing this transformation, recognized that this evening had become something more than a typical town hall debate. It had evolved into a master class in the kind of wisdom that couldn't be measured in productivity reports or quarterly yields. The kind of wisdom that asked not how quickly we could change the world, but how well we could understand and work with it. What made Samuel's words so powerful wasn't just their content, but the living proof of their validity that stood before them. A man at peace with his choices, whose community thrived without the trappings of modern convenience, whose land remained fertile despite decades of continuous use. His quiet strength challenged the assumption that progress necessarily meant complexity, that success required constant technological advancement. As Samuel Yoder's words resonated through the Lancaster County Town Hall, Ethan Cole found himself grappling with an unfamiliar sensation. The journalist's carefully constructed arguments about technological progress and modern farming efficiency began to feel hollow against the profound simplicity of Samuel's wisdom. How could someone who rejected the very foundations of modern agriculture present such compelling counterpoints? Ethan's notepad, usually filled with sharp rebuttals and pointed questions, remained conspicuously blank. The crowd's attention had shifted entirely to Samuel, who spoke of generations of sustainable practices that had preserved their land without the need for chemical interventions or industrial machinery. The Amish farmer's quiet confidence stood in stark contrast to Ethan's increasingly uncertain demeanor. When thee speaks of efficiency, Samuel addressed Ethan directly, does thee consider the cost to the soul of the land? The question hung in the air, forcing Ethan to confront the limitations of his perspective. Samuel continued, our methods may seem slow to modernize, but they have sustained our community for centuries. What modern farm can claim such longevity? Mayor Carl Whitman, who had expected to moderate a heated debate, found himself instead witnessing a masterclass in gentle persuasion. The town leader observed how Samuel's responses weren't designed to win arguments but to illuminate truths that transcended the immediate discussion. The mayor noticed Ethan's shifting body language. The journalist's previously assertive posture had given way to a more receptive stance. Miriam Yoder, watching from the front row, recognized the familiar signs of transformation she had seen in others who had encountered her father's wisdom. She caught Ethan's eye and offered a knowing smile, understanding the internal struggle he must be experiencing. The journalist's worldview, built on decades of reporting on agricultural innovation and technological progress, was being challenged not by counter-arguments, but by living proof of an alternative path. The audience, comprised of both English and Amish community members, sensed the shifting dynamic. Local farmers who had initially sided with Ethan's modern perspective found themselves reconsidering their own relationships with the land. Students from nearby colleges who had come expecting to witness the triumph of progressive ideas over traditional practices instead discovered the profound sophistication within simplicity. Ethan's certainty continued to unravel as Samuel shared stories of community barn raisings, of children learning to work alongside their parents, and of the deep satisfaction found in physical labor. The journalist found himself questioning whether the efficiencies gained through modern technology had inadvertently sacrificed something more valuable: the connections between people, land, and purpose. As Samuel spoke about the importance of maintaining harmony with nature rather than attempting to control it, Ethan recalled his own childhood in rural Vermont, before his family moved to New York City. He remembered the satisfaction of helping his grandfather in their small vegetable garden, the taste of freshly picked tomatoes, and the sense of accomplishment that came from working with his hands. When had he begun to equate progress solely with technological advancement? The seeds of doubt planted by Samuel's wisdom began to take root in Ethan's mind. His questions, once aimed at exposing what he perceived as backwards thinking, now emerged from a place of genuine curiosity. How had the Amish community maintained such strong social bonds in an age of increasing isolation? What could modern society learn from their deliberate approach to adopting new technologies? These questions marked the beginning of a profound shift in Ethan's perspective. The story he had come to write about the necessity of modernizing traditional farming practices was transforming into something entirely different. Could it be that in his rush to embrace the future, he had overlooked the enduring wisdom of the past? The Lancaster County Community Center buzzed with an electric tension as Samuel Yoder's measured voice filled the room. His response to Ethan, Cole's aggressive questioning about sustainable farming practices, had taken an unexpected turn, leading the conversation down a path no one had anticipated. In thy world, friend Ethan, what does sustainability truly mean? Samuel asked, his weathered hands folded calmly before him. Is it measured by the size of machinery, the complexity of technology, or perhaps by something deeper? Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, aware of the hundreds of eyes fixed upon him. The journalist's earlier confidence had begun to waver as Samuel's questions stripped away the layers of his predetermined arguments. Sustainability means using modern methods to maximize efficiency while minimizing environmental impact, he replied, though his voice carried less conviction than before. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. And yet, our farms have sustained families for generations without depleting the soil or poisoning the water. How does thee explain this paradox? The old farmer's question hung in the air, challenging the very foundation of Ethan's modernist assumptions. From her seat in the front row, Miriam Yoder watched the exchange with quiet pride. She recognized the familiar wisdom in her father's words, the same patience he had shown while teaching her to work the land as a child. The audience, initially skeptical of the Amish farmer's ability to defend his position against the educated journalist, now leaned forward in their seats, hanging on every word. Mayor Carl Whitman, who had expected to moderate a heated debate, found himself instead witnessing a masterclass in gentle persuasion. Samuel's approach wasn't to attack or defend, but to invite understanding through carefully considered questions that revealed the limitations of Ethan's perspective. "When thy machines break down," Samuel continued, "they require other machines to fix them. When our horses tire, they heal themselves with rest and good care. Which system truly depends less on outside resources?" The simplicity of the observation caused several audience members to exchange thoughtful glances. Ethan's professional facade began to crack as he confronted the unexpected depth of Samuel's knowledge. "But surely you can't deny that modern technology has increased crop yields and feeding efficiency." "Indeed, friend. But at what cost?" Samuel's response carried no judgment, only genuine curiosity. "Does thee measure success solely by the quantity of food produced, or should we consider the quality of life for all involved? The farmers, the land, the animals, and the community?" The journalist's prepared talking points about efficiency and progress suddenly seemed hollow against Samuel's holistic perspective. The debate had transformed into something more profound, a discussion about the very nature of progress and what it means to live in harmony with the land. Local farmers in the audience began nodding in agreement as Samuel spoke about the importance of maintaining a direct connection to the soil, understanding the rhythms of nature, and preserving knowledge that had been passed down through generations. His words resonated particularly strongly with those who had witnessed the challenges of industrial farming firsthand. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere in the community center shifted from confrontational to contemplative. Ethan found himself questioning beliefs he had held as absolute truths about progress and modernization. The journalist's notepad, filled with aggressive questions and counterpoints, remained largely unused as he listened with growing fascination to Samuel's perspective on sustainable living. The unexpected turn of events demonstrated that wisdom often appears in places where we least expect to find it, and that true progress might sometimes mean looking backward to move forward. The debate that was meant to expose the shortcomings of traditional farming practices instead revealed the limitations of viewing progress solely through the lens of technological advancement. The Lancaster County Community Center buzzed with a different energy now, markedly changed from the tension that had filled the room at the debate's start. Ethan Cole sat quietly in his chair, his tablet and prepared talking points untouched before him, as Samuel Yoder continued speaking with measured wisdom that commanded attention. "In our community, we measure wealth not by what we own, but by what we can do without," Samuel explained, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "Each spring when we plant our crops, we do so knowing that our methods have sustained families for generations. But sustainability isn't just about the land, it's about the people who work it." Mayor Carl Whitman leaned forward, genuinely intrigued by the unexpected turn the discussion had taken. The planned debate about agricultural efficiency had transformed into something far more profound. "Could you elaborate on that connection, Mr. Yoder?" Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "When a farmer uses a machine, he can work faster, yes. But what happens to the 10 men who used to help with the harvest? What happens to the bonds formed while working together, to the lessons passed from father to son? Our methods preserve more than just soil, they preserve community." Miriam Yoder, watching from the front row, noticed Ethan's expression shifting from skepticism to genuine curiosity. Her father's words were having an effect she hadn't anticipated. The journalist who had arrived ready to challenge their way of life was now taking careful notes, his earlier confrontational stance replaced by attentive listening. "But surely there must be a middle ground," Ethan finally spoke, his tone notably different from his earlier aggressive questioning. "How do we balance progress with preservation?" Samuel's response came with the same quiet confidence that had characterized his entire presentation. Progress isn't always about moving faster or producing more. Sometimes it's about understanding what we already have. Our farms may seem simple to outsiders, but they've fed families for generations without depleting the land. We work in harmony with nature, not in opposition to it. The crowd, initially divided between supporters of modern farming and traditional methods, had grown contemplative. Local farmers who had come expecting to defend their use of technology found themselves reconsidering their assumptions. Students who had dismissed Amish practices as outdated were now furiously taking notes. But what about feeding a growing world population? Ethan pressed, though his question now sought understanding rather than confrontation. Samuel smiled gently. That's a fair concern. But consider this. Our methods require no fossil fuels, create no chemical runoff, and leave the soil richer each year. If more farms operated on these principles, wouldn't that contribute to a more sustainable future? Miriam watched as her father's words resonated through the room. She saw business owners nodding thoughtfully, young farmers engaging in quiet discussions with their neighbors, and even the most skeptical audience members showing signs of reconsideration. The evening's discussion had evolved beyond a simple debate about farming practices. It had become a forum for examining the very nature of progress itself. Samuel's wisdom had revealed that moving forward didn't always mean leaving tradition behind. Sometimes it meant finding new value in old ways. As Mayor Whitman prepared to wrap up the session, Ethan rose from his seat. Mr. Yoder, I came here tonight thinking I would expose the limitations of traditional farming. Instead, you've shown me limitations in my own thinking. Thank you for that lesson in humility. The journalist's honest admission drew murmurs of approval from the crowd. Samuel's response, characteristic of his humble nature, would be remembered long after the debate. In our community, we have a saying, knowledge puffs up, but wisdom builds up. Tonight, we have all gained a little wisdom. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.